Good morning, Jeff, and welcome back to the Low Carb Paleo Show.
Thank you so much for having me again. This is wonderful to be with you guys and to talk all things mushrooms and wherever else it goes.
Yeah, be careful. They grow. Opinions are like mushroom. They grow pretty far, pretty wide.
And in the dark.
Well, and you know the old joke that I hear a lot is, oh yeah, I feel like a mushroom because I'm kept in the dark and fed bullshit.
Yeah, yeah.
This is very true. Yes.
Apparently, that quote was how do you say? Charles de Gaulle apparently said that.
Oh, is he now? Well, why not? I mean, in France, the mushroom that they grow is called the champignon de Paris. It's like
Paris,
yeah. And the reason is that that particular mushroom, which is the button mushroom, was originated there and was growing in all the limestone caves all around the Paris area. And the reason they were underground in these caves is because it was just the absolute perfect climate, about 58, 60 degrees Fahrenheit. And that one mushroom, which is really interesting, this agaricus mushroom, does not need light to grow. And most mushrooms need light. So yeah, it was just a perfect match for growing mushrooms. They didn't have to build a building or anything. They just put them down in the mines.
And in the old days, they used to use horse manure to grow it, right?
Yeah, and you know, it's interesting because they're not actually growing it out of horse manure, but what happens is in the stables, they lay down bedding, which normally was straw, and so they would take that bedding, which had the horse manure and the urine, and they'd pull it all together, and then they would compost it. And of course, horse manure is just full of microorganisms, and that's what a compost does. It is a microbial decomposition. So ultimately, that straw was broken down to a point where it became very selective for the mushroom that they wanted to grow. So it's a really interesting process. And one of the things I love to tell people about mushrooms is that they grow on agricultural waste products that otherwise, what are we going to do with these things? What about all that straw? What are we going to do with all this straw that we've got? So any kind of agricultural waste, wherever you are in the world, that's one of the first things a mushroom grower will do is he'll look around and go, what do I have to grow my mushrooms on? So you're converting this waste into a high quality food.
Right, and in those days in Paris, there was no cars, so everything was horse-drawn, and so they had a lot of poop to scoop up.
Yes,
and they used that. They used that because they didn't, in the city they didn't have cows, so they used that as a growing medium.
It's fascinating to look at some of those old films or even new films that show the carriages, horse-drawn carriages in the cities, and you're just thinking, oh my God, what was it like? Was it an army of people scooping it up, or half of it just got left there, and if it rained and all the rest, and it's just like, wow.
Yeah, you wonder how they managed to live through that, literally.
Yeah, and let's face it, the sanitation in a lot of those cities in the 1800s and early 1900s was not good.
No, that's how they learned to sidestep everything, right?
So you had to dance down the street, is that what you're saying?
That's right, yep. Good morning, Mark. I almost forgot you there.
Did you? No, that's okay. I don't mind being forgotten. That's fine.
How could anybody forget Mark? Come on.
I know. Jeez. He's just been quiet as a mushroom.
This is very true.
Okay.
So hopefully a bit prettier. Mind you, I suppose Jeff thinks mushrooms are pretty.
Do I ever? They're beautiful.
Of course, you're talking to an expert. So, Jeff, thank you for coming back on our show to talk about your COVID-19 experience. I hope you are safe and well where you are. And can you refresh our memory and tell us more or remind us who you are and what you do?
Sure. I started a company. Well, I started growing mushrooms commercially on a very, very big farm in 1973. And this farm employed 300 people. At the time, it was growing 2 million pounds of the button mushrooms per year. And I was there for 10 years. And I literally was living with mushrooms. We had 200 crops of mushrooms per year on a 90-day growing cycle. So I got to see, this process from start to finish, from building the composts that the mushrooms grew on to harvesting to, the whole process. And think about this for a second. Every week we prepared 320 tons of fresh compost. 320 tons. Our compost piles, I mean, if you're into composting, our compost piles were 6 feet wide, 6 feet tall, and 200 feet long.
Wow, that's a
We
lot
had a
of horse poop, huh?
machine. We had a machine that would actually drive down this pile. It took probably a couple of hours to get from one end to the other, because when you're doing commercial composting, you have to essentially turn it every
Right.
2 or 3 days, or else it'll go anaerobic, because we're
Mm.
doing an aerobic fermentation there. But it was just
Mm.
absolutely fascinating. After I left the farm in 1989, I started my current business called Namex, which we supply medicinal mushroom extract powders to other companies, which take our extracts, put them in capsules, bottles, or however, put their brand on it and take it to market. We also have a retail division called Real Mushrooms, where we sell them to consumers. All of our mushrooms, interestingly enough, are grown and processed in China. And there's a very good reason for that, which is that growing mushrooms for supplement use is very, very expensive.
Mm.
One of the things I want you to think about here for a second is um, every single mushroom you have ever eaten has been harvested by hand.
Wow.
Somebody has touched that mushroom to pull it off the bed it's growing in, or whatever it's growing on, to put it into a basket, which ultimately gets to the stores. So growing fresh mushrooms is and making a profit. You can do that, no problem at all. But remember, supplements are dried powders. Mushrooms, like most vegetables, are 90% water. You dry that mushroom out, you're getting $5 for it fresh. Now you have to get $50 for it as a dried product. The economics do not work. And for that reason, no mushrooms grown in North America actually end up in the supplement market. The economics don't work. And I realized that because I had a background in commercial mushroom growing. So I went to China early in 1997. I took OCIA, which is one of the largest organic certifiers, to China with me. And we had the first organic certification workshop for mushrooms in China, 1997. So we've been growing our mushrooms organically, actually certified by high quality Australian certification agency, and tested extensively. I totally believe in testing. We have markers. We don't try to build up anything in our extracts, but we have markers where we're looking for our beta glucans in there, ergosterol, the fungal sterol, and a couple other compounds. So we know exactly what we've got, that it is real. We can present that to our customers to give them a guarantee that they're actually getting a true mushroom. It's like, have you ever been in the supermarkets, let's say in the United States, and you want to, maybe you look at the fresh mushrooms going, no, they don't look very good. I'm going to try some of these dried mushrooms. And you look at these dried mushroom packages. Sometimes it's like 15 grams for $3.
Right.
It's absolutely crazy. So the economics don't work, and that's why we grow all our mushrooms in China. And interestingly enough, 85% of the world's mushrooms are grown in China.
Mm.
85%. It's just amazing. And that's something that the Japanese, the Koreans, the Taiwanese all figured out back in the 80s and moved their production right over to China, which was one of the reasons why it just stimulated the mushroom industry there. And there are tens of thousands of small growers in China. It's amazing.
Mm. I have a couple of questions. One is, when you were working on the farm, were you growing a mushroom between your toes as well?
Now that's the kind of fungus I don't want.
Okay. The other question is, what, and this may be too technical, but I'll give it a try. Which is the most efficient as far as composting, cow poop or horse poop?
Cow poop is not very good. No, the
No.
horse manure is much, much more active. In fact, cow manure is never used for a commercial mushroom compost. But you know what cow poop is really good for? It is, there are mushrooms in the world that are psychoactive that will grow directly out of cow manure if it's the right cow and if it's the right part of the world. This mushroom is actually is a heat-loving mushroom, and so it grows in subtropical areas of the world.
Okay. So then the question becomes, how do you manage to get all of this horse manure in, considering there's not that many horses anymore?
Well, you're absolutely right. When I arrived at the mushroom farm in 1973, they were hauling it in from the racetrack that was 60 miles away. So they were able to get as much as they needed, but as they expanded and grew, that became more and more difficult. So they would contract for tons and tons and tons of straw that would come in every season, and they'd store it there for use over the year. So they'd bring in their own straw, and then also we would use other types of supplements in there. One of the common supplements worldwide is chicken manure. There's lots of that available.
Yeah.
We also used what was called grape hummus, which grape hummus is after you've squeezed the grapes, whether for wine or grape juice or whatever, you have stems, you have seeds. We actually would process that grape hummus, dry it, grind it to a powder, very, very high in carbohydrates. So it would be this wonderful activator that we could put into our compost pile. It would really heat it up, because one of the things about a compost pile is getting the carbon nitrogen ratio correct. And certain materials like that grape hummus were high in carbs, so sugars. So you put that into the compost, and man, it would just light a fire.
Yeah, because those bacteria, they grow on carbs, right? Sugar, carbs.
Well, you know what, this compost is fungi, it is bacteria. There's a full complement of different types of microorganisms that are in there, and many of these are heat-loving microorganisms. And so it's a real interesting process, because during this composting, you could get up to temperatures of approximately 80 degrees Celsius, 180 degrees Fahrenheit, very, very hot. And at times, I at one point had a really interesting rod that I could poke into the pile, and I could measure the temperature anywhere in that pile to see that it was composting properly. And the whole thing was to keep everything as tight as possible so that you didn't have too much air flowing in to cool it off. No, so you wanted it tight enough so not too much air, but you still did need air to go into, because it's an aerobic fermentation. So there's
Right.
and then actually the final step in this composting was we would take it indoors in trays in this case, put it in a big room, a steam room, bring it up to 140 degrees Fahrenheit for a pasteurization type step, and then slowly lower the temperature over the course of about 5 to 6 days to where we would stimulate the production of very specific bacteria and fungi to do the final, let's just say, finishing, the final fermentation on this compost, to where the whole idea in a mushroom growing media is to make it selective for the mushroom you're growing. So this compost was very, very selective for this agaricus mushroom. That way, when you planted it into this compost, it would grow out very rapidly and other things would not grow. So it was a very, very specific type of fermentation and process.
So you're telling us you have different recipes for different mushrooms, different compost recipes?
Well, you know what? It's the agaricus actually is one of the few mushrooms out there that is commercially grown in a compost. Most of the mushrooms that we grow are wood decomposers.
Okay.
So in nature, they're growing out there on a log. Some of them may be parasites growing on a live tree, but a lot of them are just growing on dead wood. So what we grow them on is sawdust. We'll grow reishi mushrooms on a small cut wood log of maybe 6 inches in diameter, maybe 8 to 10 inches tall. That's what we grow reishi on. But all the others, we have a standard little, what you'd call a synthetic log that is sawdust with a nutrient like rice bran in it. And that's what turkey tail, lion's mane, shiitake, maitake, almost all the other mushrooms are growing on this sawdust substrate.
Interesting. Very interesting. So this is, all of this sounds very scientific as well.
Well, it is certainly. I mean, the number of mushroom scientists out there, you don't hear about them very often, but there are hundreds, thousands of mushroom scientists in the world. And what's really interesting is that when I first started in the industry, Pennsylvania State University in the United States had a actual department for mushroom growing and for mushroom scientists there. And the reason was they had a very large industry in Pennsylvania, a mushroom growing industry. In fact, at that point in time, they probably grew well over 50% of the mushrooms in the United States from that one state of Pennsylvania. So they had, and I was able to meet, because we went back for courses and things, half a dozen of these different mushroom scientists. Today, at Pennsylvania State University, there's maybe only 3 or 4 left. They just, and when I went to China, and when I first went over there in 1989, I went to a international mushroom conference, and I met scientists. And for the next 10 years, when I traveled in China, I went to research institutes, I went to conferences, I saw processors, I went to farms. They have hundreds of mushroom scientists and research stations in China. It is just amazing. And maybe that's a fact of having so many people, that you can have that many working in one particular field.
Not only that, but correct me if I'm wrong, but it's also very much in their culture to eat mushrooms, and especially healing mushrooms, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you go into the marketplace there and you've got 12 to 15 different edible mushrooms that you can get fresh, and any of those dried. And so, I mean, they even have cordyceps fresh in that market. We grow a cordyceps. We don't grow the caterpillar fungus, which is the wildcrafted cordyceps. Caterpillar fungus is wildcrafted up in Tibet, and today the value of it is around $20,000 a dried kilogram.
Wow.
Well, not only that, when I tried to introduce that into the supplement market in 1992, people looked at me and they just said, I don't think our customers want to eat caterpillars. Sorry, and it's like, besides, they're vegetarians. Come on, caterpillar meat? No, I don't think that's going to work. So, you would never find that wildcrafted cordyceps in our supplement market in North America. In fact, even in China, it's only consumed by the wealthy because it's given as presents and nobody can afford it except the very, very rich. Well, we've gone completely around that, and today we grow a different species called Cordyceps militaris. It has been used interchangeably with the caterpillar fungus. We can grow that. We can cultivate it. It's the most beautiful fungus you've ever seen. These cordyceps are like small blades of grass. You look at when they're growing, they look like a lot of little worms growing and standing up. And this particular species is bright orange. Oh God, it is beautiful. It is so, and when I was over there a couple of years ago, they served it with the meal, a platter of this, and you look down and you see all these little orange squiggly things there, and you're like, huh, kind of interesting, but it's like, oh, was that delicious? It had the wonderful mushroomy flavor. It was great, but that is a very, very powerful herbal medicine.
What are the benefits of that particular mushroom?
Well, cordyceps, they used to use it primarily for neurosthenia, or people who had been sick. They'd gotten over it, but they lacked energy. They were still fatigued. That's when they would use cordyceps for these people. I mean, there's also the use of cordyceps for people's libido. That's another, and that's kind of a famous use of cordyceps, which has given it a certain, aura of, okay, cordyceps, yes.
Right.
Personally, I'm like, look, if you really need something for your libido, just take Viagra or something like that. Work much better. Absolutely will work. You don't need to spend, $100 on, however much of this wild cordyceps. No. But primarily it's used for fatigue and lack of energy. And that's interesting because who do you think is using it in the supplement market? Well, anybody kind of selling an athletic performance type product. Right. And here's just really an interesting little story. In the 1990s, 1993, 94, a group of women runners in China were breaking all sorts of records, and people were like, what is going on? And the coach claimed that he was using cordyceps. And all of a sudden it was like, oh my God, cordyceps, stimulates this and that. And if you're an athlete, you use cordyceps and you got this great advantage. Well, it turned out that that was not true, because later on in the end of the 90s, when they were finally able to analyze for EPO, human growth hormone, they discovered that they were doping all along, and cordyceps had nothing to do with it. But the coach actually had a product, so I think he did well.
Right.
But he was ultimately fired at that point when so many groups of athletes in the late 90s got busted. Hello, Lance Armstrong, for doing these particular performance enhancing drugs before they could actually test for them.
Okay. Well, let's go back to the COVID situation. How is it now? I understand you live in Canada now for the time being, until they allow you to get out again. Are you still confined? What has been your experience through the past 6 months, basically?
Well, you know what? In British Columbia, we've been fairly fortunate that there haven't been that many cases. So there has been no what you'd call lockdown. or real, okay, you can't go out except maybe once a day, and we're going to check your, permission and all the rest. And where I live in my small community, we haven't had a single case. It's a community of 2,000 people, but we haven't had a single case. I personally have not been affected in any way. Okay, in our town, which is a tourist town, a lot of the stores shut down, and it was just like the supermarket and pharmacy and things like that kept running. And okay, people would use a mask, but ultimately, even in the supermarket, I could walk through there without a mask. They put up plexiglass between me and the cashier. They wiped things down. I couldn't bring my own tote to haul my groceries away. I had to use one of their boxes there. It was really, and still is not that difficult. Right now, the town is full of tourists. We've got all the social distancing rules in place. When I'm standing in line at the supermarket, we've got X's on the floor, this kind of thing. But really, it hasn't affected me that much. What really has affected me is leaving the country. I can't really leave the country. But let me just talk about something that I find really fascinating. I mean, it's been a time when we've learned a lot of interesting things. And one of the things that I think is the most fascinating is the benefits of vitamin D. So many reports about the levels of vitamin D in people who get COVID and don't, and it's just, I just think, and they've sort of shown, and this seems to fit in with so much of the research that I've been reviewing over the last couple of years on vitamin D, on how it's such an essential vitamin that we should all be consuming, and especially those of us in the north who are covered up a lot of the time, and even in the summertime, the sun, the way it hits us in the north, is still not as strong as it is in other areas. So we still don't get the full benefits of that sun and vitamin D. So I took that information and I went, okay, yeah, vitamin D. Everybody should be taking it, and at what, how much, and it's sort of, okay, you can take a lot, or I think the RDA is 400 to 600 IUs a day or something like that, but normally people who take it take 1,000 or 2,000 IUs a day. And then I also looked at the information on zinc, and I went, zinc, yes, an old friend of mine.
Yeah.
I used to take zinc because I read about zinc years ago, and it was like, yeah, if you're going to take one particular mineral, take zinc. It shows up in all sorts of places as being an important mineral. So, okay, the wheels are spinning in my head, because one of the things that has happened to us is when this thing hit, our sales went through the roof. It just like what I mean, look, in the last 4 years, mushrooms have sort of finally reached that tipping point where everybody is like, mushrooms, wow, I had no idea that they were such a great food, that they had all these benefits as a supplement. And that's just kept going. So, I mean, my business has, the sales have probably quadrupled over the last 4 years. I mean, it's just gone through the roof, not just our raw material sales, but even our retail sales. I mean, some of the products went out of stock immediately when COVID hit and people really started to look for something. Well, immunological enhancement, of course, people want that. And so mushrooms all of a sudden became one of those herbs that people were like, yes, we want this. We've read a lot about it. So we're going to go out and we're going to buy these mushroom products. And so really, as I surveyed this situation, I went, you know what, man, vitamin D zinc mushrooms, I thought that's what I would love to be taking, because I don't take a lot of supplements. I really don't. I feel like most of what I get for my health comes out of my diet. If my diet's good, I'm not going to need to supplement. I use our reishi mushroom in the morning with my coffee. But I thought, yeah, I should probably be supplementing with D. I should probably be taking my zinc. So I went, okay, I'm going to create a product. I'm going to put our mushroom extracts together with 30 milligrams of chelated zinc, with 2,000 IUs of vitamin D, put those three together. Now I've got the perfect supplement for me.
Right.
So we've got this product out now. It's called Mushroom D2Z. I'm just like, brilliant. This is just so great, because again, for me, it's like now I've got all three in one place, where all I have to do is take this one product, and I'm getting my zinc and my vitamin D. And here's the beauty of it. Now, I don't know if you've gotten into the weeds with vitamin D at all, but vitamin D comes from different sources, and the primary vitamin D out there is D3.
Yeah.
And D3 comes from lanolin, from wool.
Yes.
And when you look at that process and how they are getting that D3 out of the lanolin, it's not pretty.
No.
Not pretty at all. And they use chemicals in that process to ultimately refine it and all. Okay, I thought, okay. But the interesting thing is, mushrooms have a compound called ergosterol. Vitamin D that we produce is actually from our cholesterol. That's what is being, the UV is hitting our skin, and the cholesterol that's there in our skin basically is what turns into vitamin D3.
Right.
So fungi have ergosterol, and that's the fungal sterol. When you expose mushroom powder to UVB light, it turns the ergosterol into ergocalciferol, which is the vitamin D2. And vitamin D2 has been around forever. It's something that, I don't know if the history of vitamin D, but where they finally figured out that we needed it was back in the UK in the 1800s, when the Industrial Revolution was like pumping all sorts of smoke into the skies, blotting out the sun, building these cities where you've got, high buildings and the sun's not reaching down very often. And so all of a sudden they had an outbreak of rickets, and they're going, what the hell is happening here? We've got rickets in the cities, but not in the countryside.
Right.
They ultimately figured it out. And so starting in 1830s or 40s, they started supplementing diets with vitamin D2, because they could create that from yeast, which is also part of the fungal family. So vitamin D2 has been around a long time. One of the world's experts on vitamin D has stated categorically that the two act in the same way, because there's a little bit of a controversy out there whether D2 or D3 is better and all of this. He claims they have the same activity, they will do the same thing. There may be some small differences, but it's just as good as D3. Well, the beauty of it is that all I'm doing is taking a mushroom powder and exposing it to UVB light. That turns that mushroom powder into a very high value vitamin D. And I'm just like, isn't this wonderful? So the product I'm talking about is reishi and chaga mushroom extracts, 400 milligrams. And then I've got this vitamin D powder from a mushroom.
Mm-hmm.
And then I've got the chelated zinc in there. And, you know, I'm just like, I love the idea that we can actually, and we've got just a pure vitamin D product that we sell in the Real Mushrooms line that is every capsule's 1,000 IUs of vitamin D, and it's from just mushroom powder, no processing involved. That's what it is, right from. So for one, you know, if you're a vegan, of course, that's a perfect choice for you, but also it's in a sense plant-based. It's simple. The processing is very gentle. There's not much going on there. So for me, I'm just like, this is what I love. I love this kind of stuff. It's like, that's what I love about mushroom growing. We're using waste products to turn them into a high quality food, ultimately supplements. And here we can take those mushrooms and actually produce a vitamin D powder. I just think that's the most wonderful thing in the world.
Well, it proves again that nature has everything if you know where to look and how to handle it.
Yeah, it's
Right.
it's just fantastic, and so I'm still waiting to get my hands on the first bottle. It's out now, and it's just into the marketplace. I'm like, okay, when are you going to send it to me? I want
Right.
some.
So I already know the answer, but I thought I'd still ask you online. You were not in China when this whole virus popped out, right?
No, I wasn't there. Well, we were there last year in September for an international medicinal mushroom conference, which
Right.
was really great fun, really enjoyable. And we go there every year to do farm visits and
Right.
to meet with our production partners over there. This year, unfortunately, we can't do that. And I was talking to my brother, who again lives in Shanghai, and he was telling me, if you come into China, well, you have to go through 2 weeks of quarantine.
Right.
And he said he knew somebody who recently did. And he says, you don't get to choose which one of these isolation hotels they put you into. So he said his friend got put into a hotel where he said, you know, it was, he called it a 3-star, which maybe in China is, you know, not quite, maybe it's only a 2-star or something. He said
Right.
the hotel room, they had put plastic down on the floor of
Right.
this hotel room that he was in, and he couldn't go out. They had to bring everything to him, but some of the other hotels, like the 4 or 5 stars, 4 or 5 stars, they could actually send out for meals. But in this hotel, no, they just had to take whatever the hotel gave them. So this poor person, was
Yeah.
stuck there with like services lesser than his station really should have given him.
Sometimes you have to do the best you can.
Yeah.
Going back to the health aspect of it, I believe you and I and Mark agree that the best protection against this is a strong immune system.
Yes,
Can you
absolutely.
talk to us? Can you talk to us about it and how your products are supporting the immune system?
Sure. You know what's really interesting about fungi and the mushrooms that we sell is that in their cell walls, they have a component called beta glucan. And this beta glucan is part of the fiber in the cell wall. And one of the things about mushrooms is that they are mostly carbohydrate, and a lot of that carbohydrate is fiber. So mushrooms are very high in fiber. So when you're eating them as a food, there's a lot of fiber that is going through, and you can think of it as a prebiotic. It's actually feeding your microbiome. So these beta glucans, what's really interesting about them is that we have a receptor site. We have these receptors that actually are specific to beta glucans. And there's been a lot of sort of query about why. And they think that maybe that is because what happens is when the beta glucan comes down and locks in with these receptors, they will stimulate the production of immune cells. So they will produce macrophages and NK cells and ultimately cytokines. And the theory is that we have that to ward off fungal diseases.
Right.
That so you know, okay, I don't know. So these ultimately are theories on why we have these sort of things, but the bottom line is that these beta glucans are what give mushrooms their medicinal quality. The fact that they can stimulate these immune cells, and that's why mushrooms are considered to be a adaptogen. You know,
Right.
an adaptogen is something, and it's kind of an interesting term. It's something that's non-specific, something that helps to create balance. And you know, for me, the way I look at health in general is that, and I think this is kind of the Eastern view of it, is that something is out of balance to create the illness that we've got. And so the whole idea behind medicine is to bring us back into balance. What is it that's creating this imbalance? Where's that coming from? Is it actually a pathogen, or is it something else that we're doing in our life that's creating that? So what we're really after is some kind of homeostasis, which is where the adaptogen has sort of gotten its name, is helping to promote homeostasis. And the other thing that I look at in terms of mushrooms, and this is where the whole immunological aspect comes in, is that mushrooms are something that we should be taking as preventive medicine. This is something that is not necessarily, oh gee, I'm getting a cold, I better ramp up my mushrooms. It doesn't really act that way. They really are in the background. We need to be taking them continually. They're there helping us out, helping to sort of create that balance, help us in that way. So I look at them as really prevention, and I look at them as kind of a classic food as medicine. That to me is, isn't that really what we want our food to be anyway?
Yes.
We want it to be, not only nutritional and feed us that way, but medicinal in the sense of it's also helping us in ways to ward off disease. And the other thing I like to say here too is that I don't subscribe to these kind of, we've got to fight this, we got to fight it and kill it, and and it's like, this is something that I was sort of taught being an American, because everything for them is kind of in that sense a fight.
Yeah.
Now look, maybe
it's a war.
Yeah, well, exactly. And you look at the language they use for everything. They've got that same language, the war language that they use, and
someone you might not like has said recently that it was a war against the invisible enemy.
Well, sure. I mean, that's classic, the way that they will present these things and the language they use. In the US, I've seen so many different wars, like the war on poverty, the war on drugs, everything's a war on something. And it's like, I just reject that metaphor as being inappropriate. We may struggle against these things, but I look at it as we're in a ecosystem here where everybody is just essentially trying to get along. Sometimes we have challenges when something has infected us in some way. We have challenges, but it's almost like if you act like water, and water is just kind of flowing, and you just kind of flow around this and flow around that and go with the flow here, and you hit a rock and you flow around it. That's kind of, to me, what life is really about. It's not about hitting a rock and then trying to break your way through it.
Yeah.
That's really not it. So that's how I look at it, and that's what I love about mushrooms is they're part of this food as medicine, which, you know, I look at all my food that way. I look at it as this is nourishing me in so many ways. Just like when I love broccoli. Broccoli is my favorite vegetable, and it's like not only is it a great food, but then you start to look at the chemicals in broccoli and what research has told us about that, and it's like it's a fabulous food, and it's another food is medicine. And so
Right.
really this is the way I like to picture all of that, and that's where, you know, mushrooms will fit in with these beta glucans, and they're very important. And that's why that's one of the compounds that we will measure, because we think that's a very accurate way to guarantee that our products have what should be there. And we try our best to maintain the profile of that dried mushroom when we do all of our extractions. We're not trying to build up this or build up that. We just want the extract to have essentially the same level of beta glucans as the mushroom itself. So we know it's like 30% or 50% or whatever that may be. What's interesting is two of the mushrooms that we hear the most about, reishi mushroom and turkey tail mushroom, have the highest level of beta glucans.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's just, I found that so fascinating when we started to do all our analyses. It was like, wow, isn't that interesting? Reishi, which is so highly revered, has the highest level of beta glucans of all these mushrooms. Reishi
Mm-hmm.
also has other compounds, triterpenoids, which are give it that sort of extra um, ability that a lot of the other mushrooms don't have, but which I think sets it apart. And that's why reishi is kind of a very special mushroom. But I just found that really fascinating in terms of the beta glucans.
Oh yeah, I have a question that might be sound complicated, but I'm sure you'll get, and I hope I can express it properly. So mushrooms keep our um, digestive system and gut healthy, which the gut health has an influence on our moods and how we feel, you know, as far as mood, depression, so on and so forth. Would you say that in these difficult times where a lot of people are depressed, would you say that your mushroom can also help the mood, elevate moods, people's mood?
Well, you know what, that's really interesting, because one of the mushrooms, lion's mane, they've been using it in clinical trials for uh, early onset dementia,
Mm-hmm.
depression, and you know, bringing up this whole idea of the digestive system and its functions on depression. That's one of the areas where they've used lion's mane traditionally too, is for the digestive system. So not only does it have these compounds in there that stimulate what's called nerve growth factor, which helps to organize the neurons in our brain, not only to stimulate that, but it also has, and I don't know exactly what the mechanisms are because I haven't read a lot about that, but it's kind of interesting that you should bring that up, because I never would have put that together until now. And so now I'm thinking, well, maybe that's one of the other reasons why it has this benefit in terms of, and why they're using it for dementia and depression and so on. But you know, I don't know if you're
Well,
familiar with.
you mentioned earlier the effect of mushroom on certain mushrooms on neurostania, which is a fancy word for depression, isn't it?
I looked at neurasthenia as being, again, sort of that tiredness and fatigue.
Okay.
That's how I've defined it, at least what I've read about it, and maybe there's multiple different aspects to neurasthenia, um, but that's how I've seen neurasthenia and with cordyceps. But you know, uh,
Well,
the
recently there there's more and more studies of the gut and its health and its environment and so on and so forth. And there's more and more research proving there's a connection between the gut health and the brain health. This is what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, I understand, and that is such a fascinating topic, and especially that aspect to it, that the gut health and the gut and the microbiome. I mean, a lot of people are kind of saying the microbiome is to some degree controlling us in certain ways, and certainly in terms of our health, it's a big part of that. So, but I haven't read deeply enough on that subject to really be able to speak to it much at all. But obviously that is something that is very, very important. I mean, there's a few other mushrooms that have been used for gut health too. Chaga, for one, that's a classic use of chaga, um, um, and then lion's mane, and maybe that's just part of diet generally, and the way that diet is so important to keep us healthy and happy.
Mhm. Right. Besides the other kind of happy mushrooms.
Well, that's interesting as well, because psilocybin mushrooms, they're using those for depression and for mental health issues, and I think that is, look, as a child of the 60s and having watched prohibition in North America and worldwide on any type of psychoactive plant or mushroom, to finally see the research coming back and being allowed to proceed is such a positive step forward. And what they're finding out is what I would have expected, and most of us have kind of known all along, is that it's a very, very positive um, mushroom compound that has tremendous benefits in so many areas. I mean, they're using it for addiction, using it for end of life issues. I totally support this movement. I mean, frankly, I didn't expect they'd ever legalize pot. It's like I thought it was going to be, and when I was smoking it, and I did for many, many years, I just thought, okay, it's illegal, but I don't care. And now that it's legal, I don't smoke it that much. So it's kind of
Right.
it's like,
So,
well, I've got to be an outlaw if I do something. So it's like,
right. So now we know the truth. The real reason why you got into mushroom business is because you used to grow your special mushroom, right?
oh, Elaine, don't tell anybody.
Uh, we'll keep it a secret.
Yes, that's right. Are we recording? Well,
So,
look, I wrote a book called The Mushroom Cultivator. It was published in 1983. I was a co-author of the book, and it's got very clear instructions on how to grow mushrooms at home, including psychoactive mushrooms. And because of that, that book has been very popular. It still sells 5,000 copies every year.
wow.
Like, yeah, I mean, it's still selling, and that is 40 years ago. It
Wow.
still sells 5,000 copies a year because it was just a great guide. And, it's 400 pages. It's not a small book, 400
Right.
pages, but very detailed instructions on growing mushrooms at home.
Well, now we know where to go.
You do indeed. Yeah.
So going back to the COVID situation, do you have any special recommendation on how people can not survive, that's the wrong word, but get over this without too much damage, whether it's emotional or health wise?
Wow. Well, I don't know. I tell you, it's a very difficult situation. I mean, I'm kind of like, okay, everybody, get to your bookshelf and start reading because you've got, it's just so uncertain. For one, we hear different things coming out from those who tell us about, the government and all the rest. Those people, it's like we're getting conflicting information from them.
Yeah. Yeah.
The problem with the way they're addressing it is that, okay, you want to shut down and quarantine, great, and then at a certain point you start to bring it back to normal. Oh, guess what? We've got another small cluster. Let's go back to quarantine again. How
Yeah.
long can you do that? You
I think
can't. I mean, the
the,
damage that they're doing to people by doing that is outrageous,
right.
especially,
So
it's absolutely outrageous.
constant fear, fear relief, and they keep you on the edge. And
Yeah.
I feel they're trying, at least some of the experts, they drag it out until we have a vaccine so they can vaccine everybody and get rich in the process.
You know what? I totally agree with that. And look, you really are going to rush a vaccine out there to us? No, thank you. And
No.
then the whole idea that we have to be, everybody's going to have to, I mean, that's my biggest fear is that you will not be able to travel, enter a country unless you've got a permit that says, okay, yes, he's been vaccinated, so he's clear to go. In China, actually, they do have this system now with your
Yeah.
smartphone. It's
Yeah.
basically yellow, green, red, and wherever you go, you've got to show that. And unless it's green, you cannot pass. If it's yellow or red, you're stuck. You're not going
Right.
anywhere.
Right. It's
So
basically Bill Gates' wet dream.
oh, it absolutely is, and I don't trust the man.
Completely.
Look, Bill Gates is a convicted monopolist. They
Right.
got him back in early 2000. He kind of rules the world with his Windows operating system. That's why I don't use any Microsoft products.
Well, I guess that's why he's getting into bugs now, because he's bought millions of dollars of shares into different pharmaceutical companies that are working on vaccines right now.
Oh yeah, absolutely. He's very deep into vaccines. I mean,
Right.
totally into that. So he's and you know what? Look, if you start to get into it and read a little bit about him and his vaccines, it's not a pretty picture. So anyway, I'm not waiting for a vaccine, and I don't get a flu shot every year. I mean, a
No.
lot of people
No.
do. I don't get a flu shot. I don't believe
No.
in that really. I
No.
I I feel like, look, I'm healthy and half the time that flu shot is not for the right strain of flu
Yes.
anyway. And
Yes.
so
Not
it's
only
just,
that, but from my understand, there's the PCR test. When you've been taking the flu shots, the PCR test will pick up on that and claim you are positive for the virus when it's just leftovers from the previous flu shots,
yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah. And that's the situation for me that I'm really worried about is that they're going to use this as a method of basically tracking and tracing and
Yep.
maintaining where you can go and where you can't go, and just starting to restrict people. I mean really we're getting to a point where we can't even leave our country or
Yep.
enter another country without even more permits of some point. So they're really sort of restricting us in that way, and I don't like it, period.
Yeah, no, I'm absolutely with you on that, and I believe Mark is as well. It's a matter of just controlling the population, like the same way they tag animals, right? They'll be tagging us and
Abs-
microchipping us and
Absolutely, you can just
tracking
see
us.
it coming. It's just like I've been watching the whole thing of digital money and watching, all the little trial balloons about, okay, we're going to go cashless, and you hear about it for years and years, and slowly they're working towards that, and that's where it's going. There's no question in my mind that we'll be cashless in 10 years, if not earlier, and certain places are already. China's pretty much cashless at this point in time. I mean, it is like
Right.
everybody. I mean, and look, the other thing is if you don't have a smartphone, you can't travel. It's
Right.
that simple. You may not even be able to live a life without a smartphone. And
Right.
so that's the other side of it too. And I just call the smartphone and the people using them, and not all, everybody obviously, but the zombie apocalypse. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't care where I am walking down the street and there's zombies walking around and they're just like this the whole time. And I'm just like,
Right.
oh my God. Or you get on any sort of public transport or something, and everybody's sitting there like this. It's like, okay, I
Yeah.
kind of get it. This is some little machine that was made for people waiting in line or
Yeah.
something else. It's the new book where you can stand there and play games and like, okay, I don't care if I'm in line. I'll just play games for the next couple hours.
That's right. Yeah. It keeps people quiet and more docile. I mean, that's it. You know, in the old
Yeah,
days
yeah.
when you get in line and somebody tried to get to cut in front of you, that was hell to be paid, right? Now it's like people don't care anymore because their mind is somewhere else.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. It's a
what's your take on mask as a
on the
protection?
mask.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? It's one of those things where it just gets bounced back and forth. I read something this morning, and it said that of all the patients that had gotten COVID recently, some study that was just done, they said that 80% of the people were claimed to be wearing masks all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, okay. I've been watching the reports out of Sweden, and I just saw something this morning from Sweden, and a woman there had a video showing her getting on the subway and everything. Nobody's got a mask on.
Yeah.
And say what you will about, oh yeah, well they had a lot of deaths, more than Norway and all the rest. Yeah,
No.
they kept their economy running, and in terms of the actual, from what I've seen anyway, they're not getting this second wave the way a lot of these other countries are. I just think the thing about it is that you can't shut everything down because you've got a cluster of cases, then kind of try to go back and then have to shut it down again and again
No.
and again. How long can you do that while you're ruining people's lives, and people who are maybe they need to have different surgeries or medical types of issues that they need taken care of, and you've got, life isn't going on like it should. So there's a lot
Right,
of
right. And that's one thing that people never, or at least the media doesn't ever focus on, is that all of these hospitals that are shut down to everything but COVID, then you have all these other sicknesses, heart disease, cancer, kidney disease, so on and so forth, that do not get treated, and they're not getting their treatment as needed. And the death from that is tremendous. Not to
well,
mention not to mention suicide and alcohol abuse and so on and so
oh
forth.
yeah, all of the above. Plus, you've got a tremendous underclass that now does not have those gig jobs or whatever they are to make money. You've got so many businesses that have been shut down. Yeah, I mean, if you're in the restaurant industry, I feel sorry for you because I mean, look at it. They're making it so that nobody wants to go into a restaurant anymore.
Right.
Uh,
Well,
and
I
and
used to drive. I used to drive for Uber, and I lost that gig
well,
because
yeah, well, there you
who
go.
who wants to
There,
take a chance?
yeah, exactly. So you're driving people into poverty, and if you're in the wrong place, I mean, if you're in Canada, you're probably pretty good because we've got a great system here. If you're in the United States, you are in bad shape. They've already got tent cities all over the U.S. With poor hygiene and people that are just on the edge. And you think
Right.
those are doing better or worse right now? I mean,
No,
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 it's been
no.
a disaster.
We're looking at potentially millions of people on the street, additional on the street, because of this situation, people losing their jobs and left and right, and mostly in the lower social economy level, because all the high tech people pretty much they can work from home. Microsoft just told its employees from now on, you just work from home. Going back to, there was an interesting, I think it came out yesterday, Dr. Navarro from the CDC claimed that the lockdowns were extremely detrimental to economies. Finally, the CDC admits that the lockdown is not a good idea.
I found that to be a very positive statement, and I thought it was about time. And you know, unfortunately, in the U.S., everything in the U.S. gets politicized.
Yeah.
It's like you're on one side or the other. It's like you're either for them or against them, and it's just this ugly situation where you know, at a time when you absolutely don't need this kind of thinking and this kind of politicization of everything. That's what you've got down there, and you get people that are being shot in the streets over their political beliefs, groups coming together. It's just insane.
Well, speaking of the one we shall not name, what did you think about the situation where he got sick last week and then within 2-3 days he was out and he was fine again? Isn't that a positive sign for the rest of us? I mean, for people that are afraid of the virus?
Well, you know, it is. Unfortunately, it's just you just don't know in any kind of these situations. But certainly it can be taken that way. You know, unfortunately for this man, he doesn't really know how to express himself very well. So he's always, you know, sort of like saying things that you're just kind of like shaking your head. I mean, he's not that great a communicator. Let's put it that way. I like the fact, you know, don't get me wrong. I'm not on either political side. I like the fact that he has to go directly to people, but sometimes what, you know, like with Twitter and stuff like that, but
Yeah,
sometimes you're just like, what are you saying here, really? You know, it's like, and so both sides to me are so corrupt.
right.
It's just like, it's just a corrupt country.
Well, some people claim that there's a reason behind all this madness when it comes to the one that shall not be named. So
You mean to say we're in a forum where we can't even say people's names? That's where it's gotten to, right?
well, you know,
It's just funny, you know,
we,
and I understand.
I have to assume that a lot of our followers are against him, so we'll keep him.
I
Yeah,
know, and it's funny because I have a brother who's a deep supporter of the president. I
right.
have lots of friends who absolutely hate him,
Yeah,
and it's like, you know, I just kind of stay out of it because I don't want to. I don't want to get involved in that because to me, the political system in the U.S. needs reform, desperately needs reform, and I don't see any reform on the horizon at all. So I'm just like, you know what, I'm just not going to get involved here and say
yeah,
too much. I'll watch it from a distance, but
yeah.
you know, it's just
Let's
like,
just say that the next few weeks should be very interesting.
I know, I know. You're going to have the whole world on election night. The whole world will be tuning in to see what happens.
Right. And they could
And you know,
turn,
it's kind of funny for me because it's like, you know, the worst thing possible. You've got one side that has demonized Russia. You've got
right.
the other side that has demonized China. I mean,
Yes.
all those tariffs on China really hurt me a lot because we have to pay duties on products that we bring in. And that's just
Mhm.
giving money. It doesn't, you know, it hurts me, no one else, because that money just goes right to the government. It doesn't
Yeah.
hurt my suppliers at all. It hurts me. And I haven't raised prices on my customers, but if they were to jack those up even more, I would probably have to put a China surcharge on, or I would call it maybe a US government surcharge
Right.
with what it is. So, you know, I do have an interest in that sense, but otherwise, you know what, I, I've never seen it quite so bad. And as somebody who was born and raised in the U.S., I've never seen it this bad. And it's really unfortunate because it is creating a civil war of sorts.
Yeah. Well, Let's hope it doesn't turn to that after the day after the election, right?
Man, no kidding.
So back onto more solid ground. Any other suggestion you have for our listeners before I pass it on to Mark?
No, not really. Well, I guess one thing I would say is, and I say this to everybody, is put mushrooms into your diet. It's a fabulous food. I call it the forgotten food, the missing link. Put mushrooms into your diet. You will not regret it. They're delicious, wonderful food, especially shiitake. Shiitake is my favorite mushroom. Most people can get it if they're in a metropolitan area. So try shiitake, great mushroom, and put mushrooms into your diet and be sure to cook them properly, high heat, cook them well. If you put them on a low heat, you know what happens? The water comes right out of them. They're sitting in a puddle. And then you hear somebody says, "Oh yeah, mushrooms, they're so slimy, hate them." It's like, well, you didn't cook them right. You got to cook them properly. So anyway, that's one of the things I definitely.
So can you elaborate? When you say high heat, you mean dry heat like oven or pan fry instead of being cooked in water, for example?
Well, what I'm saying is when you're frying them,
Yes.
put them on a high heat. I mean, if you're baking them in an oven, that's a totally different thing. But if you're frying them, don't fry them on too low a temperature. Make sure that, because as soon as you do, you can just watch them. The water just starts coming right out, and then they're just swimming in a pool of water. Mushrooms are going to shrink. You kind of put them on that high heat. You kind of sear them on both sides, which browns them up a little bit. They always shrink. So you put in, you think you got a lot of mushrooms in there. You got half as much when you're finished. I like to brown them up, cook them a little longer than normal, but in a hot fry pan. I use either olive oil or canola oil, something like that, for my frying, and they're wonderful. They're great. I eat mushrooms probably 4 or 5 days a week. I'll eat them, and I don't eat a small amount. I eat a lot of them. I mean, I can sit down and eat 200 grams of fresh mushrooms and without even thinking about it. Last night I had a wonderful steak, and I had at least 200 grams of fresh mushrooms that went with that I ate with it.
Well, for a vegetarian or vegan, mushroom is a great alternative to meat, right?
Absolutely is a great alternative. I mean, I said mushrooms are primarily carbohydrates, but a lot of mushrooms have a good amount of protein with a very good amino acid profile. There's only one essential amino acid that's missing. So yes, absolutely great to supplement in terms of protein. Agaricus is 35% protein. So that's one that people should definitely look at. Shiitake is about 20%, but regardless, they're both really excellent foods.
Well, okay, I think I'm done on my side. Mark, your turn.
You didn't tell me it's a tag team here.
Yeah. When you thought you were done, you're not done yet.
I know he's going to just throw me to the mat.
Exactly. Well, I mean, what you probably didn't realize is that Alan was asking you the easy questions.
Oh, perfect.
I've been taking notes, and I'm going to ask you the hard ones. Actually, one thing you did say that sort of amused me quite rightly, when talking about masks a little bit earlier, you said that 80% of those people who proved positive for COVID had been wearing masks.
Yes.
Sorry.
So I saw that research as well. Yes, it's a fairly recent research. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I just saw that research. I think it was yesterday that said that. And I said with the masks, they say, well, the mask, that gets around it and this, that, and the other. And the particles now they're finding they're aerosol particles. They're very fine. They just go through it, around it, whatever. And I don't know. I think, in general, there's probably, maybe good reason at times somebody sneezes nearby or whatever, and maybe that'll help. But it's a fairly simple thing. Fortunately, it's not like I just saw something yesterday, believe it or not. I saw something yesterday. A company just came out with, it's actually a space type helmet. with a
Yes,
big clear glass.
yeah, I
And
saw it. I saw it. It
put
looks
it
like,
on.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and you can breathe. Got a breather port. It says it's not very comfortable to breathe through, but I guess there's a place where you can put a straw through it. I mean, really, is that where we're going? Where people are now going to live in bubbles? Look, we cannot live in a bubble. Period.
No, but the
Yeah,
point I was making was if 80% of those people who proved positive for COVID were wearing masks, that means you're 4 times as likely to get COVID through wearing a mask than not.
actually, I'm looking at this study right now that says, and there's a chart. This chart shows areas with the highest number of daily cases in the past 2 weeks, and 19 of the 20 areas with the highest COVID-19 case have mandatory mask mandate. So the places where they force people to put the mask on have the highest level of cases than the other kinds.
Yeah, I don't know. It's like, again, there's just too much conflicting information out there, and I just, it's so hard to sort through it, and you run with one of the things they say, and the next thing you know, they've turned around and claimed the opposite. It's just, I personally, we to some degree have used the Swedish model here in my community. I mean, right now the stores are all open. They do have only so many people at a time, and you've got to wear a mask and all that. So that's not exactly the Swedish model, but everything is pretty much open now. I've seen people in restaurants, which is interesting. So but maybe it's just the fact that we live in a country that is much more socialized. That's the problem with the US. It's just like so unsocialized in that sense, and people go their own way and have their own ideas, which is fine. But that does create a little bit of an issue when it comes to everybody getting with a program to do something. Like in Sweden, it's a homogeneous population. So but I think their model has worked better. I think fewer people have been put into a compromised situation from economically, which is really important.
Yeah. Anyway, Jeff, I mean, you've already given us a huge amount of information. So before we go any further, in case people want to follow up on what you've been saying, where can they get hold of more about you and what you do?
Well, our website is namex.com, NAMMEX.com. I've got a lot of information there, slideshows on taking you off to our mushroom farms and all of that. And then if you want the actual consumer product, you can go to realmushrooms.com, and that's where you can get our products in packages and capsules and bottles and all of that. So either one. And Real Mushrooms also has a lot of great information there. So I really recommend people come just to get the information, because it's, that's the most important thing for us. It's just educating people.
Super, John. Thank you very much. Now, I want to take you back to a long time ago, or maybe not that far, he says, thinking about being polite. You said you started in your career, as it were, on a mushroom farm. But why did you choose mushrooms?
Well, I was kind of fascinated by mushrooms, and even before university, I had a bit of a fascination about mushrooms. I don't know exactly what it was, but of course I grew up in a place, Pacific Northwest of the United States, Washington State, where the climate's perfect. In the fall, we have a fabulous wild mushroom season. So perfect climate for mushrooms. And then at university, with everything going on there, and it's the 60s, and we're experimenting with different psychoactive plants. We actually had magic mushrooms growing on our university campus. We I in the late 60s at the university, I was digging into the use of mushrooms. My major was anthropology. I was digging into the use of mushrooms by people historically for food, for medicine and for shamanic purposes. And there was some really interesting information that was starting to come out at that time, because in the 50s, a New York banker named Gordon Wasson got some information from others that there were groups of people in the mountains of Mexico still using psychoactive mushrooms in their healing ceremonies. Can you imagine, after all of this time, and after the Spanish arriving in the 1500s and basically repressing all of the native religions and so on, there were still people in the world that were actually using mushrooms in a healing way. Psychoactive mushrooms. This was huge news. It was a rediscovery of this, and that as well as other writings by other authors that were all of a sudden starting to come out. I just became very fascinated with the whole subject. And then, of course, by the fact that I found out, that they grew in my area wild, was like, wow. So there was quite a movement in the Pacific Northwest during that period of like-minded people, not just for the psychedelics or psychoactive plants in general, but for mushrooms. We had a whole kind of mushroom gathering in the late 70s with 3 other men. We put on 4 mushroom conferences that brought in educators on identification of mushrooms, shows on use of mushrooms in a psychoactive way. I did workshops on cultivating mushrooms. At our last conference that we did, the 4th conference, our keynote speaker was Terence McKenna. So this was like a really interesting time. And when I got out of university, I went to Mexico. Actually, I lived in Mexico for a year and a half in mushroom country, just following that track. And then when I got back home, it's like, how do I get a job in, with a degree in anthropology? And then I thought, well, actually, I'd really love to learn how to grow mushrooms. So there's one mushroom farm in Washington State. I went there, applied, got a job. I was there for the next 10 years.
Excellent. So it grew on you almost.
Yes, exactly. Not on my toes, but it did grow on
me. You said earlier that sort of vitamin D3 comes from cholesterol, which, as we know, is true.
Right. That's right. Yeah.
Through the action of sunlight. Do you find then it's a bit insidious the way that over the last 20 or 30 years we've been encouraged to cut down cholesterol when it's sort of the source of something that does us so much good?
Isn't that so interesting? Yeah, it is. And, let's face it, that's the way that science, so to speak, has progressed. And, I think the other side of it is there, in the US and in the West, we have competing food interests. And these food interests, the food processors, the food processors were the ones that switched us from butter to margarine.
Yeah.
My father switched us to margarine in the mid 50s. And he grew up on a farm where they had real butter and real milk and all the rest. He switched us over. He had us taking vitamins in the mid 50s. Now, the one positive thing he did, in a way, was he kept sugar out of the house, turned me into a real bakery fiend. But yeah, there's so many interests. Look, go into a supermarket, go into the middle aisles. What do you see there? These are the interests that are controlling the food industry. And it's just like the pharmaceutical industry. Big business is controlling all of that. It's the way they've kind of kept alternative medicine and herbal medicine sidelined. This is how the world works in the West, and it's all a lot of very big players that ultimately decide what we eat, what drugs we take, all the rest.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So I mean, if you could sort of, I'll ask you an unusual question. If you could go back, let's say, to the beginning of your career, is there anything that you wish you could have pursued and didn't get round to yet?
Yeah, to some degree, it would have been interesting, I think, to have maybe gotten deeper into anthropology, carried on with that. I was actually not a very good student, and even taken more courses in botany, and I had a couple of mycology courses, but having taken botany would have been kind of good. Honestly, I was not ready for university. I had the grades and all that, but I was not a very good student. So, and look, it was the 60s. The 60s was not a good time. I mean, it was a good time, but it was not a good time to be a student. There was too much other stuff going on. And remember, for us in the United States, there was a war going on. I mean, we were out in the streets a lot too, protesting the war. So there was just so much happening then. And plus, it was just such a wonderful time for music. The sexual revolution was happening, for God's sakes. I mean, were you supposed to sit back and do nothing there? I mean, it was like a really, really interesting time.
Yeah. So I mean, you're obviously then quite happy with the way life has sort of panned out for you in many ways. You certainly seem very happy. So I mean, and I know that starts from a good health position.
I would say, generally speaking, yeah. I mean, you could look back and say, okay, there's a few things I should have done, but didn't. But in general, I would say, yeah, I'm pretty satisfied with it all. I mean, for one, I have no debts, which is a very good thing, and that's something. I've got two very wonderful sons who actually work with me in the business, which has been just fantastic, because that means I get to talk to them all the time. I did not have that kind of relationship with my father. Maybe I spoke to him a couple times a year.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're obviously a very, very happy person in the sort of in the roundest sense of the word. With all these very nice products coming out. Now, you spoke earlier that you sort of developed one almost in response to the COVID situation.
Yeah, yeah.
Are there any more coming out that we can keep an eye out on?
Well, yes. I mean, we're really trying to expand out the retail side of things and kind of develop. We don't want to be too much of a Me Too kind of product development, but we'll definitely come out with our current vitamin D product is 1,000 IUs. It's very expensive. And once we get up to where we're in major production of vitamin D, we'll step that product up and we'll bring the cost down. And I think that's going to be kind of a revolution for us. And in general, that you'll have these vitamin D products coming directly from mushroom tissue that will be similarly priced, maybe a little bit more expensive, but they will be not nearly as expensive as what we sell them for now. And I'm really looking forward to that. And there's always interesting new mushrooms that are coming along that have interesting properties. We're always on the lookout for that. And that's where going to these conferences, like in this conference, the Medicinal Mushroom Conference last year in China, was just so great, because we met so many people. We saw a lot of presentations about that. So in that sense, the business is really something that will grow. It will continue to be creative. And part of that is having my sons involved, because they are going to ultimately be those who take it forward, not me. I mean, I'm slowly, well, I'm pretty much out of day-to-day stuff as it is, which is great. We've got more employees now, and I'm training people all the time to be able to take some of the stuff that I do. I would rather be doing what I'm doing now. speaking to you than and doing more creative things, looking at the research and so on, than any kind of day-to-day stuff. I mean, I'm really involved in quality control because I really believe in that. So I'm really involved in looking at all the testing that we do, and new projects, because we got a lot of new projects for our testing, and being able to test, for example, lion's mane for some of the compounds there. So we got all that. But really, what I love to do, Mark, is I love to fly fish for trout in rivers.
Mm-hmm.
That's my passion. So that's what takes me to Argentina. And at some point, I really got, the other thing I really am interested in is coming to the UK and wandering around looking at all of the ancient sites, all the ancient stone monuments and dolmens and things like that. I'm very fascinated by that too.
Yeah, and of course in South America you're surrounded by sort of very ancient stoneworks and so on.
Yeah. In fact, I love ancient cities. That I really love. When I travel, I love to go to any kind of city that's still got that section of the city that's the old city, so to speak.
Yeah. I mean, you spoke briefly earlier about how mushrooms have been part of the diet and the medical usage in many different civilizations throughout the ages. How far back have you traced sort of use of mushrooms medicinally, for instance?
Well, medicinally, you can trace them back to, I think, the about the 2nd or 3rd century. I want to say AC. Is that right? I mean, I'm trying to, I mean, it's BC, but basically,
Yeah.
that far back there. And then the actual psychoactive mushrooms, you could trace them back for thousands of years through rock paintings and other types of ancient monuments and records that we've got out there. So I think mushroom use has been around as long as we've been humans, looking for interesting things to eat. And as we do, we come across these really interesting plants that take us into other dimensions, let's say. So I think they've been around for a long time. And there's actually some theories out there about the use of psychoactive mushrooms on our development. And I think that's really interesting as well. That's certainly a possibility. You start to take these things and they're like giving you this heightened acuity visually, sense of smell, sense of taste, sense of hearing. All of a sudden it's like sharpened 100%, which kind of is interesting too, because it shows us what is possible. And I think that's one of the things that they do, is they show us what is possible, because I think as we are programmed growing up, it's just basically a matter of shutting us down to where we only utilize a small part of what we're capable of, and only what's necessary for keeping this economic wheel in motion.
Yeah, that's very true. Okay, we've asked you other questions. Is there anything that we should have asked you and didn't?
Not really. I mean, I think last time we talked, I did mention a bit about, being careful about when you're looking at supplements that, and looking for supplements that are not manufactured in the US, because they grow this mycelium on grain product and grind it up and sell it as mushroom, and it's mostly starch. And so just have to be very careful about that. If you see mycelium on a label, don't buy it. Because that's what you'll be getting, is mostly starch. So look for something that also talks about the beta glucans and gives you some at least. And that's not always going to be 100%. I mean, look, the supplement market is just a absolute jungle. There's just so many products that are not good products, and the adulteration issues have never gone away. They've been there for thousands of years. You just have to be very careful when you're looking at, look at the labels and look up the company, and be very careful, because there's a lot of companies out there that build their brand on nothing more than marketing. I mean, think about Coca-Cola, how much they spend on marketing and how little they spend on that liquid in that can. the liquid is worth less than the can, right? And the liquid and the can are worth 1/100th of what they put into all their marketing, maybe 1,000th of what they put into their marketing. So there's lots of those kind of products out there that are all marketing. And, I think it's funny. Maybe you've noticed that there's a formula now for new websites. And it's just, I see all of them and I'm like, okay, there's a testimonial from whoever's got the business and how they were once sick and now they're well. And they've got a wonderful product that brought them there and now they're going to sell it to you. And, I'm kind of like, you're still actually telling that story. I mean, it's like, and I get it. I mean, some people have epiphanies like that, which is wonderful. Most of us, it's more of a journey than an epiphany. I mean, we all have certain epiphanies at a certain point in our lives, which is a wonderful thing. But, look, the business of the US is business and selling, and there are people out there that they don't really care what they're selling as long as they can take your money from you. And, that's just the nature of the beast.
It is. Super. Well, thank you for that. Alan, back to you.
Well, I'll do my world famous closing now. Everybody quiet now. Thank you. Now, no comments from the peanut gallery, please. Thank you again, Jeff, for being on the Low Carb Paleo show. And as we say in Texas, a votre santé, yo.
Bueno, mucho gusto en tenerme en tu programa. Me gustan mucho los dos, Mark, Alain, sí, very nice.